Procrastination is not laziness. It is not a lack of intelligence. And it is definitely not a simple problem of poor time management. In fact, some of the most capable, ambitious, and talented people struggle with procrastination every single day. So if you have ever delayed an important task, avoided something you knew mattered, or promised yourself, "I'll start tomorrow," you are not alone. Procrastination is deeply psychological. It is rooted in emotion, fear, brain chemistry, and even identity. Today, we are going to uncover the powerful psychological facts that explain why we procrastinate, and what is really happening inside your mind when you delay action. One of the most important psychological facts about procrastination is this: procrastination is an emotional regulation problem, not a productivity problem. When you avoid a task, you are not avoiding the task itself. You are avoiding the uncomfortable emotions attached to it. Those emotions might include anxiety, self-doubt, boredom, frustration, confusion, or fear of failure. Your brain is wired to protect you from discomfort. So when a task feels emotionally threatening, your brain looks for immediate relief. And that relief often comes in the form of distraction. Scrolling social media, watching videos, cleaning your room, or doing easier tasks. In that moment, procrastination feels like protection. Another powerful psychological factor is the conflict between your present self and your future self. Research in behavioral psychology shows that we tend to prioritize immediate comfort over long-term benefit. Your present self wants relaxation, pleasure, and relief right now. Your future self wants success, achievement, and growth. The problem is that your brain gives more emotional weight to the present. The future feels distant and abstract, while discomfort feels immediate and real. So you delay the work, telling yourself that future me will handle it. But when the future arrives, it becomes the present, and the cycle continues. Fear plays a massive role in procrastination, even when we do not consciously recognize it. Fear of failure is one of the biggest hidden drivers. When you care deeply about something, the stakes feel high. And when the stakes feel high, failure feels threatening to your identity. If you never fully try, you never fully fail. Procrastination becomes a psychological shield. It gives you an excuse. If you perform poorly, you can say, "I didn't really try." That protects your self-esteem. In this way, procrastination is often linked to perfectionism. Perfectionists delay starting because they are afraid they cannot meet their own high standards. There is also the fear of success, which sounds strange but is very real. Success brings change. It brings responsibility, expectations, and visibility. Sometimes people subconsciously avoid progress because they fear the pressure that comes with achievement. If you succeed, people will expect you to maintain that level. That can feel overwhelming. So the brain creates resistance. That resistance appears as procrastination. Another psychological fact is that unclear goals increase procrastination dramatically. When your brain does not have a clear starting point, it experiences cognitive overload. Large, vague tasks like write a report, get fit, or start a business feel overwhelming because the brain cannot immediately visualize the first step. Overwhelm triggers stress, and stress triggers avoidance. The more unclear the task, the easier it is to delay it. The brain prefers specific, manageable actions over abstract, intimidating projects. Dopamine also plays a crucial role. Dopamine is the brain's reward chemical. When you complete a task, you get a small dopamine reward. But modern technology provides instant dopamine notifications, likes, entertainment, quick wins. Compared to these instant rewards, long-term goals feel slow and unrewarding. Your brain naturally gravitates toward what gives faster pleasure. This is why procrastination has become more intense in the digital age. We are constantly surrounded by immediate gratification, which makes delayed gratification harder than ever. Decision fatigue is another hidden psychological factor. Every decision you make throughout the day drains mental energy. By the time you sit down to work on something important, your brain may already be exhausted. When mental energy is low, the brain defaults to easy options. Procrastination often happens not because you lack discipline, but because your cognitive resources are depleted. This is why many high performers schedule their most important work early in the day, when mental energy is highest. Identity also shapes procrastination patterns. If someone internally believes, "I am not disciplined, I always delay things," or "I am bad at finishing projects," their behavior begins to match that identity. The brain seeks consistency between beliefs and actions. So if you label yourself as a procrastinator, you unconsciously reinforce that pattern. Changing procrastination habits often requires changing self-perception first. When someone starts seeing themselves as a person who takes action, behavior gradually shifts. Another psychological insight is that starting is usually the hardest part. The brain resists activation energy. Once you begin, momentum builds. This is known as the Zeigarnik effect. Our brains tend to remember unfinished tasks and feel tension until they are completed. Ironically, the anxiety about a task is often worse before starting than during the task itself. But because the brain exaggerates anticipated discomfort, we avoid beginning. Once we take the first small step, resistance decreases significantly. Mood also heavily influences procrastination. Many people wait until they feel motivated to start. But motivation is often the result of action, not the cause of it. Waiting for the perfect mood creates delay. Psychologically, this is called mood-dependent behavior. When we only act when we feel inspired, productivity becomes inconsistent. Understanding that action generates motivation is a powerful shift. When you act first, feelings follow. Childhood conditioning can also shape procrastination habits. If someone grew up in an environment where mistakes were heavily criticized, they may develop avoidance patterns. If failure meant shame or punishment, the brain learned to associate performance with emotional pain. Procrastination then becomes a defense mechanism developed early in life. It is not weakness, it is learned protection. There is also something called temporal discounting. This is the tendency to undervalue rewards that are far away in time. For example, the reward of exercising today might be better health in 6 months. But the comfort of staying in bed is immediate. Because the brain discounts future rewards, immediate comfort wins. Understanding this bias helps explain why long-term goals feel so hard to prioritize. Interestingly, stress can both cause and result from procrastination. When you delay tasks, stress increases as deadlines approach. But when stress becomes overwhelming, avoidance increases. This creates a vicious cycle. The brain seeks relief from stress by escaping the task, which increases future stress even more. Breaking this cycle requires interrupting avoidance early. Another key psychological factor is task aversiveness. If a task feels boring, repetitive, difficult, or meaningless, the brain labels it as unpleasant. Humans naturally avoid unpleasant experiences. Increasing meaning and connection to purpose can reduce procrastination. When you deeply understand why something matters, resistance decreases. Social comparison also influences procrastination. In a world of constant exposure to other people's achievements, it is easy to feel inadequate. When tasks trigger comparison, "What if I'm not as good as them?" avoidance increases. Instead of risking comparison, the brain chooses delay. Sleep and physical health matter more than we think. When sleep quality is low, emotional regulation weakens. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for planning and discipline, becomes less effective. This makes impulse control harder. Fatigue increases procrastination significantly. Taking care of physical well-being directly supports mental productivity. Perfectionism deserves special attention. Many people believe perfectionism leads to excellence, but psychologically it often leads to delay. When the standard is impossibly high, starting feels risky. You might think, if I can't do it perfectly, why start at all? This all-or-nothing thinking traps many high achievers. Progress requires accepting imperfection. Breaking procrastination requires understanding its emotional roots. Instead of asking, how do I force myself to work? A better question is, what emotion am I trying to avoid? When you identify the emotion, fear, boredom, confusion, you can address it directly. Sometimes that means breaking the task into smaller pieces. Sometimes it means challenging negative self-talk. Sometimes it means simply starting for 5 minutes. The 5-minute rule is powerful. Telling yourself you will work on something for just 5 minutes reduces psychological resistance. The brain does not feel threatened by 5 minutes. But once you begin, momentum often carries you forward. Self-compassion is another scientifically supported strategy. Harsh self-criticism increases stress and avoidance. When people forgive themselves for procrastinating, they are actually more likely to take action. Guilt keeps you stuck. Compassion helps you move. Environment also shapes behavior. If your workspace is full of distractions, your brain will choose them. Reducing friction for good habits and increasing friction for distractions makes action easier. Psychology shows that willpower is less reliable than environment design. Finally, understand this: procrastination does not define you. It is a pattern, not a personality trait. It is a protective response your brain developed to manage discomfort. Once you understand that, you stop fighting yourself and start working with your psychology instead of against it. The truth is that growth requires discomfort. Every meaningful goal involves temporary struggle. When you train your brain to tolerate small amounts of discomfort, procrastination loses its power. Action builds confidence. Confidence reduces fear, and reduced fear reduces avoidance. So the next time you catch yourself procrastinating, pause. Ask yourself what you are feeling. Take one small step. Remind yourself that starting imperfectly is better than waiting perfectly. Your future self is built by the actions you take today, even the small ones. Because in the end, procrastination is not about time. It is about emotion. And once you master your emotions, you master your actions. Now let's go even deeper into the psychology of procrastination and explore something most people never realize. Procrastination can actually become addictive. Yes, addictive. When you delay a task and shift to something easier or more pleasurable, your brain experiences relief. That relief reduces stress temporarily. And whenever a behavior reduces stress, the brain remembers it. Over time, procrastination becomes a coping habit. Not because it solves problems, but because it temporarily reduces discomfort. The brain learns, avoiding this makes me feel better right now, and anything that gives immediate relief gets repeated. This is why procrastination can feel automatic. You may not consciously decide to avoid the task. You simply find yourself doing something else. The behavior happens before awareness. That is the power of habit loops. There is a trigger, uncomfortable task, a behavior, avoidance, and a reward, relief. Unless you interrupt this loop consciously, it continues indefinitely. Another fascinating psychological truth is that motivation is deeply connected to perceived competence. According to self-determination theory, humans are motivated when they feel capable, autonomous, and connected to meaning. When a task makes you feel incompetent, like you don't know enough, or you might not do well, motivation drops sharply. Procrastination then steps in as protection. In many cases, what looks like laziness is actually insecurity. The person is not avoiding effort. They are avoiding feeling inadequate. There is also something called analysis paralysis. When a task involves too many options or too much uncertainty, the brain struggles to choose. Too many possibilities increase cognitive strain. Rather than risk making the wrong decision, the brain chooses none at all. This is especially common in creative projects, academic writing, business planning, or career decisions. The irony is that clarity often comes through action, not overthinking. But the brain prefers certainty before action, which is not always possible. Let's talk about deadlines. Interestingly, many procrastinators perform well under pressure. This creates a dangerous belief: I work better at the last minute. While adrenaline can temporarily enhance focus, chronic last-minute stress damages mental health, sleep quality, and overall performance over time. The brain becomes conditioned to rely on urgency as a trigger for action. Without pressure, it does not activate. This makes consistent productivity extremely difficult. Emotional forecasting also plays a role. Humans are surprisingly bad at predicting how they will feel in the future. We overestimate how painful a task will be and underestimate how good it will feel once completed. Think about how many times you delayed something that, once finished, felt relieving and satisfying. The brain exaggerates anticipated discomfort. This distortion keeps procrastination alive. Another psychological dimension is control. When people feel forced to do something, resistance increases. Even if the task is beneficial, perceived lack of autonomy triggers rebellion. This is called psychological reactance. The brain resists being controlled. That is why reframing tasks as choices rather than obligations can reduce procrastination. Instead of saying, "I have to do this," saying, "I choose to do this because it supports my goals," restores autonomy and reduces internal resistance. Let's also examine the role of identity conflict. Sometimes procrastination happens because a goal does not align with your deeper values. If you are pursuing something due to social pressure, family expectations, or comparison rather than genuine desire, your motivation will weaken. The brain struggles to commit energy to goals that do not feel authentic. In such cases, procrastination is not the problem. Misalignment is. There is also a strong connection between anxiety disorders and procrastination. High anxiety increases avoidance behavior. When the mind constantly anticipates negative outcomes, it chooses escape. Avoidance temporarily lowers anxiety, which reinforces the pattern. But long-term, avoidance increases fear. Facing tasks gradually reduces anxiety. Avoiding them strengthens it. Let's talk about self-talk. The internal dialogue running in your mind significantly affects procrastination. Thoughts like, "This is too hard," "I'm not ready," "What if I fail?" or "I'll never finish" increase emotional resistance. Cognitive psychology shows that thoughts influence emotions, and emotions influence behavior. If you change the narrative, for example, "I can start small," "Progress matters more than perfection," or "I only need to begin," the emotional intensity decreases, making action easier. Now consider energy cycles. Human productivity is not linear. We operate in peaks and troughs. Some people are mentally sharp in the morning, others at night. Procrastination increases when tasks are scheduled during low-energy periods. Aligning difficult work with high-energy windows reduces resistance dramatically. Understanding your biological rhythm is a powerful tool against delay. Let's also address boredom. Boredom is psychologically uncomfortable because it lacks stimulation. In a world full of constant entertainment, tolerance for boredom has decreased. When a task feels slow or repetitive, the brain searches for novelty. Building boredom tolerance, the ability to stay with unstimulating tasks, is now a modern skill. Those who can focus despite boredom have a significant advantage. There is something powerful about public commitment as well. When goals are shared with others, accountability increases. Social psychology shows that humans care deeply about reputation and consistency. If you declare an intention publicly, you are more likely to follow through. However, interestingly, announcing goals can sometimes reduce motivation if the brain feels it has already received social approval. So accountability works best when it involves progress reporting, not just goal declaration. Let's explore the connection between procrastination and self-worth. For some individuals, productivity becomes tied to value. If they fail, they feel unworthy. This makes starting emotionally dangerous. So they delay. Procrastination protects self-worth by preventing the risk of visible failure. The solution in such cases is separating performance from identity. You are not your output. You are not your mistakes. One more powerful concept is the progress principle. Research shows that small wins boost motivation significantly. When you break a large task into tiny milestones, each completed step generates a sense of progress. Progress fuels motivation more reliably than distant outcomes. Instead of focusing on finishing the entire project, focus on finishing one paragraph, one slide, one email. And here is a transformative mindset shift. Discipline is not about forcing yourself aggressively. It is about designing systems that reduce emotional friction. Clear plans, structured routines, reduced distractions, and realistic expectations minimize psychological resistance. When structure increases, procrastination decreases. Finally, understand this deeply. procrastination is human. It is not a flaw unique to you. It is a universal psychological response to discomfort. But awareness changes everything. When you recognize that procrastination is your brain's attempt to protect you from negative emotion, you stop seeing it as an enemy. You begin to see it as a signal that something feels overwhelming, a signal that something feels unclear, a signal that fear is present, a signal that energy is low. When you respond to the signal intelligently, with clarity, small steps, compassion, and structure, procrastination weakens. Your life is shaped by repeated actions, and repeated actions are shaped by small daily choices. Each time you choose to begin, even imperfectly, you rewire your brain slightly. Neural pathways strengthen with repetition. Action becomes easier. Resistance becomes weaker. You do not overcome procrastination in one dramatic moment. You overcome it in small, consistent decisions to start, even when you don't feel ready. Because readiness is often a myth. Growth happens in motion, and the moment you take the first step, you prove to yourself something powerful. You are capable of action even when discomfort is present. That realization alone can change everything. Now let's explore something even more profound. Procrastination is often connected to how we perceive time itself. Psychologically, human beings are not naturally wired to think long-term. Our brains evolved for immediate survival, not distant achievement. Thousands of years ago, survival depended on reacting quickly to immediate threats, hunger, danger, weather. Long-term planning was less important than immediate action. That ancient wiring still exists inside us. So when you sit down to work on a project that benefits you months or years from now, your brain struggles to treat it as urgent. But when your phone lights up with a notification, your brain reacts instantly. One feels abstract, the other feels immediate, and the brain always prioritizes immediate signals. There is also something called present bias. Present bias makes current rewards feel more valuable than future rewards, even when the future reward is significantly bigger. For example, the comfort of relaxing right now feels stronger than the long-term satisfaction of completing your goal. This is not weakness. It is cognitive bias. But once you become aware of it, you can consciously counteract it. Another important psychological layer is emotional tolerance. People who procrastinate frequently are often highly sensitive to discomfort. They feel stress, frustration, or confusion more intensely, and therefore escape more quickly. On the other hand, individuals who build emotional resilience can stay with discomfort longer. The ability to tolerate temporary unease is one of the strongest predictors of long-term success. And here is the good news. Emotional tolerance is trainable. Each time you work through mild discomfort instead of escaping it, you strengthen that capacity. Now let's discuss the role of clarity and structure. The human brain thrives on certainty. When a task feels chaotic or undefined, the mind experiences threat. But when a task is structured into specific steps, anxiety reduces. This is why detailed planning reduces procrastination. Not vague planning, but clear, actionable steps. Work on research paper creates resistance. Write 200 words of the introduction creates clarity. The brain resists ambiguity but responds to precision. There is also an interesting psychological connection between procrastination and control over outcomes. When outcomes feel uncertain, effort feels risky. If you are unsure whether your effort will lead to success, your brain hesitates to invest energy. This is known as expectancy theory. Motivation increases when you believe effort leads to performance and performance leads to reward. When belief weakens, procrastination grows. Let's talk about comparison again, but from a deeper perspective. In the age of social media, people constantly see polished results, not messy processes. You see someone's finished success, not their delayed drafts, failed attempts, or emotional struggles. This distorts your perception of normal progress. When your work feels imperfect compared to someone else's final product, discouragement appears. Discouragement fuels delay. Understanding that success is built through imperfect action can free you from this psychological trap. Another subtle cause of procrastination is decision avoidance. Some tasks represent change, and change threatens stability. Even positive change requires adaptation. When starting a project could alter your identity, career path, or lifestyle, the brain hesitates. Delay becomes a way of staying in the familiar. Humans prefer familiar discomfort over unfamiliar uncertainty. That preference can quietly sabotage growth. Now consider the relationship between procrastination and goal size. When goals are too large, they activate fear. When goals are too small, they fail to inspire. There is a psychological sweet spot, challenging but achievable. If your goals constantly overwhelm you, your brain learns to avoid them. Calibrating goals to match your current capacity reduces avoidance dramatically. There is also research showing that implementation intentions significantly reduce procrastination. Instead of saying, "I will work on my project tomorrow," saying, "Tomorrow at 9 a.m., I will sit at my desk and write for 30 minutes," increases follow-through. The brain responds better to specific cues tied to time and location. Specificity reduces negotiation. Let's also examine self-forgiveness. When people procrastinate and then criticize themselves harshly, they increase shame. Shame lowers motivation. Lower motivation increases procrastination. It becomes a destructive cycle. Studies show that individuals who forgive themselves for past procrastination are more likely to take action in the future. Compassion creates forward momentum. Self-attack creates paralysis. Another powerful psychological insight involves momentum. Newton's law applies metaphorically to behavior. Objects in motion stay in motion. When you remain inactive, inertia grows. When you begin acting, even minimally, inertia shifts in your favor. That is why tiny habits are so powerful. 5 minutes of work today is psychologically stronger than waiting for a 2-hour perfect session tomorrow. Let's address something critical. Chronic procrastination can sometimes signal deeper issues such as burnout, depression, or chronic stress. When energy is severely depleted, the brain prioritizes survival and recovery over productivity. In such cases, the solution is not pushing harder but restoring energy. Productivity without well-being is unsustainable. Sometimes procrastination is not a discipline problem. It is an exhaustion signal. Now imagine this. Every time you choose action over avoidance, you are literally rewiring your brain. Neuroplasticity allows neural pathways to strengthen with repetition. The more you act despite discomfort, the more natural it becomes. Over time, what once felt overwhelming begins to feel manageable. The brain adapts to the behaviors you repeat. But here is the deeper transformation. Overcoming procrastination changes your self-trust. When you repeatedly delay, you weaken trust in yourself. You stop believing your own promises. But when you begin following through, even on small commitments, self-trust rebuilds. And self-trust is foundational to confidence. Confidence is not built by thinking positive thoughts. It is built by consistent action. Let's close this part with a powerful realization. You will never eliminate discomfort from meaningful work. Every ambitious goal carries uncertainty, effort, and vulnerability. Waiting for a day when you feel zero resistance is unrealistic. The key is learning to move with resistance present. Courage is not the absence of fear. Productivity is not the absence of discomfort. Progress is not the absence of doubt. They exist together. The people who achieve extraordinary things are not those who never feel like procrastinating. They are those who feel the resistance and start anyway. And each time you start, you send your brain a new message. I am not controlled by temporary emotion. That message, repeated consistently, reshapes identity. And when identity shifts, behavior follows naturally. The battle against procrastination is not fought in dramatic moments. It is fought quietly, in the decision to begin when beginning feels difficult. And that quiet decision, repeated daily, changes everything.